My name is Harold. I am 74 years old and I live alone in a modest home tucked beneath the pine hills of Oregon. I wasn't always alone. For 30 years I shared this house with Elaine, my wife, my partner, my only true compass in this world. She's been gone now for nearly 5 years. Cancer took her quickly, too quickly. Every morning since the funeral, I've opened the same drawer, top drawer of the old walnut cabinet in our bedroom. That's where I keep her wedding ring. A plain gold band with a tiny inscription on the inside, E and H always. I placed it there myself after the doctor handed it to me. Said she didn't want to wear it into the cremation chamber. I nodded, took it, and promised I'd keep it safe. The ring never moved, not once in all those years. I'd open the drawer, see it resting right where I left it, next to her velvet-lined jewelry box with her name still etched on the lid. It gave me peace, a little routine to start the day, until yesterday. Jacob, my only son, is 32 now. He's smart, good kid. He's engaged to a woman named Melissa. Graceful, polite, always perfectly put together. Too perfect, maybe. Their wedding was set for the next day. Stressful week, lots of visits, lots of conversations. That morning I reached for the drawer like I always do. Same motion, same quiet breath. But when I looked inside, the ring was gone, not misplaced, not shifted, just gone. And for the first time in 5 years, the quiet of the house felt dangerous. I didn't panic right away. That's the funny thing about getting old. You start to question yourself before anything else. Maybe I'd moved it. Maybe I'd cleaned the drawer and forgotten. Maybe it rolled under something, or maybe I bumped the cabinet and didn't notice. Your brain starts offering excuses before your heart even realizes what it's feeling. But the longer I stood there, staring at that empty space where the ring always sat, the less convinced I became. I checked the rest of the drawer, pulled everything out. Elaine's hairbrush, her old prayer cards, a couple of faded perfume bottles she never threw out, all still there, but the ring was not. I got on my hands and knees and searched beneath the cabinet, behind it, under the bed, under the rug. Nothing. It wasn't missing. It was gone. I sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed my temples. My first instinct was to blame myself. Memory slip, senior moment. I even said out loud, "Come on, Harold, you probably moved it last month and forgot." But I knew better. I haven't touched that ring since the day I placed it there. 5 years of silence, 5 years of reverence. The drawer had never even been opened except for that quiet moment every morning. I went to the cabinet again and examined it carefully. The lock was old, brass, and stiff. I never bothered locking it, but it had a distinct squeak when opened. I'd oiled it once, long ago. But it squeaked again now, and I hadn't fixed it. A person would notice if they opened it, and I would hear it if someone did while I was in the house. Still, the drawer wasn't damaged. No signs of forced entry, no scratch marks, no disturbed dust, nothing. That was when I began thinking back through the past week. Jacob and Melissa had visited 3 times, once on Sunday for brunch, again on Wednesday to pick up some photo albums, and once more just 2 days ago. Each visit was short, pleasant, filled with talk about seating charts, florists, and last-minute arrangements. Melissa had brought pie. Jacob had cleaned the porch gutters without me asking. It had all felt warm, easy, too easy now that I thought about it. I remembered something that didn't feel right at the time but hadn't struck me as important then. During the Wednesday visit, Melissa had asked to use the restroom, which is just down the hall from the bedroom. I stayed in the kitchen with Jacob, making coffee. I remember hearing the floorboards creak more than once. I assumed she was just walking around, maybe admiring the family photos I keep hung in the hallway. People do that, but now in hindsight it didn't sit right, and then there was the Friday visit. Jacob had gone out back to inspect the old storage shed while Melissa stayed behind, saying she had a mild headache and needed to sit down. I offered her some water, which she declined. She excused herself again to the restroom. A few minutes passed, too many maybe. When I came back in, she was standing near the hallway bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines of old encyclopedias. She smiled and said she used to read encyclopedias as a child. I nodded, not thinking much of it. Now, though, that image stuck in my mind, not because of where she was standing, but because of where she wasn't supposed to be. The cabinet with the ring sat just 4 steps from that hallway. My bedroom door had been slightly open that day. I never close it fully unless I'm sleeping. She could have walked right in. It wouldn't have taken more than a minute. The strange part was I didn't feel angry, not yet. I felt disconnected, like I was trying to solve someone else's puzzle. Like this was happening to another man in another house. I tried one more thing. I went out to the garage where I keep a notebook. little brown spiral I use to jot down reminders, chores, things I don't want to forget. I flipped back to 2 months ago. Sure enough, there it was, April 3rd. Polish Elaine's ring and clean the cabinet drawer. I'd done it after a long walk. That was the last time I touched the ring. I remember running the soft cloth over the band, reading the engraving inside, E&H always. Then I returned it to its box, gently, carefully, as always, so no, I hadn't misplaced it. I hadn't forgotten. I hadn't bumped it under the bed. It had been right there until sometime between then and now, and the only people who had been near that drawer, my son and his bride-to-be. The thought sat heavily in my chest, like a stone I wasn't ready to carry. I stood there in the garage for a long time, notebook in hand, heart beating louder than usual. I wasn't ready to accuse anyone, but I was no longer willing to pretend nothing had happened. Something had, and I was going to find out what. Melissa always called me Mr. Harold, not Dad, not even Harold with a soft joke, the way Jacob's past girlfriends used to break the ice. Always Mr. Harold. Every time she said it, it came wrapped in a perfect smile, wide, bright, polite. The kind of smile you'd see on the cover of a bridal magazine. The kind of smile that says all the right things but hides everything else. The first few times, I chalked it up to nerves. She was still getting to know me, wanting to make a good impression. That's what people do when they're meeting the parents of the person they plan to marry. But after a while, the smile didn't soften, it just stayed frozen, like she was always performing. Even around Jacob, it never dropped. No inside jokes, no unguarded laughter, only curated affection. The day after I discovered the ring was gone, I didn't say a word to Jacob, not yet. I needed to see Melissa's eyes when I brought it up. I needed to watch her, not hear her. That evening they stopped by again. Melissa brought banana bread, homemade, or so she said. Jacob was talking about wedding rehearsal logistics. I nodded along, distracted. My eyes kept shifting to Melissa, who sat with her legs crossed, hands folded neatly in her lap. That smile stayed plastered on her face like a porcelain mask. When Jacob went out to take a call, something about the band arriving late, I saw my window. I turned to Melissa and said casually, "Funny thing this morning. I opened Elaine's drawer like I always do, and her wedding ring wasn't there." Her reaction came in 3 stages. First, the blink too fast, almost mechanical. Then the smile faltered just slightly at the corners, like it had been tugged from behind a curtain. Finally, she reached for her teacup and said, "Oh." "That's strange, not upsetting, not concerning, just strange." She sipped her tea slowly, eyes carefully avoiding mine. I leaned back in my chair, pretending to relax. I thought maybe I moved it, but I looked everywhere. Drawer's always been where I kept it, hasn't gone missing in all these years. Melissa nodded. "Maybe you'll find it. Sometimes things turn up in the oddest places." The words were right, the delivery was wrong. She wasn't trying to comfort me, she was trying to close the subject. I didn't press her, not then, but I watched, and something small but telling happened as Jacob returned. She changed positions, crossed the other leg, adjusted her blouse, smiled wider. I noticed her thumb brushing the edge of her ring finger, almost reflexively. Like she was aware of her own hands in a way most people aren't, unless they've held something recently that didn't belong to them. Later that night, after they left, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The banana bread was untouched. My coffee had gone cold. That blink, that tight smile, that evasive deflection. I'd seen all of that before, but not from Melissa. Elaine had been a teacher for 30 years. And during that time, I watched her confront hundreds of teenagers who tried to lie their way out of late homework or failed tests or skipped classes. There was a certain look, she told me once, that people have when they're telling half-truths. A look that tries too hard to stay calm. A silence that's a little too polished. A body too still, like it's afraid any movement might betray it. That's what I saw in Melissa. The next morning, I searched the guest room closet. Not because I thought the ring would be there, it wasn't, but because I wanted to know if she'd touched anything else. Inside, their weekend bags were still resting on the floor from the last visit. Hers was neatly zipped shut, untouched. I didn't open it. That wasn't my goal. I wasn't hunting through her things like some paranoid old man. I just stood there and looked at it, a quiet suitcase holding a louder truth. Melissa wasn't who she pretended to be, and I had no proof yet. No photos, no video, no fingerprints, only instinct. But that was enough to keep me up most of the night, because the smile she wore wasn't politeness, it was strategy. There are moments in life that don't fade with time. They don't blur around the edges or soften like everything else seems to as the years pass. They stay sharp, too sharp, still colored in high contrast, still humming with the weight of what was lost. The morning Elaine died is one of those moments. We were at St. Vincent's Medical Center, room 408. The walls were pale yellow. She hated yellow, said it looked like hospitals were always pretending to be hopeful. But she didn't complain, not once. The nurse had stepped out to give us privacy. Elaine was thin by then, her hands like paper resting on the blanket. Her voice barely rose above a whisper, but her eyes, they still had their clarity. Blue, bright, and full of something I couldn't name. Strength, maybe, or peace, or both. She took my hand, looked at me for a long while. Then she whispered, "Keep the ring, Harold, don't bury it with me." I asked why, and she said, "Because one day you might need to remember that you were loved deeply, entirely, no matter what comes next." An hour later, she was gone. The doctor came in, murmured his condolences, and gently slid the ring from her hand. He passed it to me like it was something sacred, and to me it was. I held it for a long time that day, even after they took her away. I couldn't let go, I didn't want to. That ring wasn't just gold, it was the story of our marriage. Of late-night arguments and early morning forgiveness. Of raising Jacob, burying our parents, scraping through lean years and laughing our way through better ones. It had been on her finger through everything, and now it was mine to protect. I didn't wear it. I wasn't that sentimental, but I gave it a place. A specific one, top drawer of the cabinet in our bedroom, next to her jewelry box. I told myself that as long as it stayed there untouched, a part of her remained with me. A quiet promise that I hadn't let go entirely. So when I opened that drawer and found it empty, it didn't just feel like something was missing. It felt like Elaine had been taken from me a second time. That day after Melissa and Jacob left, I sat in the bedroom with the drawer open for nearly an hour, just staring at the spot where the ring had always rested. My hand kept drifting toward it, then away, unsure what to do with itself. I thought about what Elaine would say. She wouldn't panic, she never did, but she'd look me straight in the eye and tell me to trust my instincts. She used to say that my gut never lied, that I had a better radar for people than I gave myself credit for. And she would definitely tell me not to let sentiment cloud my judgment. So I decided to treat the situation the same way I used to approach mechanical problems back when I worked in maintenance engineering. Start simple, follow the process, one step at a time. First, confirm that the ring was indeed missing and not just misplaced. Done. Second, eliminate innocent explanations. Done that too. Nothing made sense unless someone had taken it. Third, identify who had access. Only 2 names, Jacob and Melissa. And fourth, gather evidence before making accusations. That was the step I wasn't ready for yet, because even though my gut screamed the answer, my heart whispered denial. I didn't want to believe that the woman my son was about to marry, the one he trusted, admired, built dreams with, could do something so small and so cruel. But more than that, I didn't want to believe that Jacob might have known, that he might have let it happen. A part of me was still holding out hope. Maybe there was some strange misunderstanding. Maybe the ring had fallen and she'd picked it up to return it and forgot. Maybe anything but the truth I was starting to see. But then I'd remember Elaine's last words, her request, her trust. That ring was more than metal. It was memory, it was her love made solid. And now it was gone, and something in me, something old and buried, had just started to wake up. I hadn't been to Silverbrook in decades. The storefront still looked the same. That pale blue trim around the windows, the brass door handle shaped like a lion's head, and the faint chime when you stepped inside. The same sound Elaine and I heard that afternoon in 1973 when we walked in, young and broke, to buy wedding rings we could barely afford. Back then the owner was a stocky older man named Mr. Venslow. Big hands, quiet voice, and eyes that could tell what a couple needed before they finished their sentence. He sold us the simplest pair he had, 2 plain gold bands, no stones, no flash, just an engraving. Elaine's idea, of course, E+H forever. I remember the way she smiled when she held that tiny band in her palm like it was a living thing. I told her it was too simple, too small. She shook her head and said, "Forever doesn't need decoration." Now, over 50 years later, I stood in that same shop, but the world had turned too many times since then. A young man, probably in his late 20s, stood behind the glass counter where Venslow used to be. Tall, clean-shaven, dressed in a black button-down shirt, professional but not polished. He looked up as I walked in and offered a smile. "Good morning, can I help you?" I nodded slowly and approached the counter. "I have a question," I said, "about a ring." He leaned forward. Are you looking to buy or sell? Neither, I replied. I'm trying to track one down. His expression changed slightly, just a flicker of curiosity or maybe concern. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I had written down the description on the back of an old envelope before leaving the house. A gold band, I said, laying the note flat, engraved inside with E+H forever. It would have been sold here sometime in the past few days. Do you remember seeing anything like that? He didn't answer immediately. He scanned the note, then looked up at me with a hesitation that didn't come from confusion. He knew something. I could see it in the way his mouth pressed into a thin line and the way his fingers tapped the countertop twice, then stopped. I'm not trying to cause trouble, I added. I just need to know if someone brought that ring here. He exhaled slowly and nodded. Yes, he said. It came in 3 days ago. Woman in her late 20s, brunette, said it was an old family item she didn't need anymore. I almost didn't take it, to be honest. The engraving caught my eye. Did she give her name? I asked. He nodded again and reached beneath the counter. From a small drawer, he pulled out a slim binder and flipped through the pages. Then he stopped, scanned something with his finger, and looked up at me. She signed the release as M. Bennett, Melissa. I had already known it deep down, but hearing it, seeing it written in black ink on official paper, made the air feel heavier. She said she was clearing out her mother's estate. The man continued. Didn't mention anything about it belonging to someone else, just that it wasn't her style. I remember because that engraving, E+H forever, it stuck with me. Thought it was too personal to sell. I offered to hold it for a few days before finalizing the purchase, but she insisted. I stared at the binder, the page, her name. You still have the ring? I asked. He shook his head. No, sir, I sold it the next day. An older gentleman from out of town came through. Looking for a vintage wedding band, didn't ask about the engraving, just liked the weight. Of course it was gone, of course. Do you have a copy of the receipt? I asked, with her signature. He hesitated. Technically, that's private, but he looked at me for a long moment, really looked. Then slid the binder a few inches closer, tapping the page with his index finger. I leaned in. There it was. The handwriting was delicate but practiced. M. Bennett. Signed under a date and transaction number. I can't give you a copy, he said, but you can take a picture if you want. I did. My hand trembled slightly as I held the phone, not because I was angry, not yet, not even because I had lost the ring, but because I now had proof, undeniable, sharp, real. Melissa hadn't made a mistake. She hadn't accidentally taken something or picked it up to return it later. She'd walked into a jewelry shop and sold my wife's wedding ring like it was nothing more than spare gold. I thanked the clerk, tucked the phone in my pocket, and walked out into the Oregon sun. The chime on the door jingled behind me, and for the first time in years I wished Elaine had been wrong, because in that moment I didn't want to remember that I'd been loved. I wanted to forget that I'd let someone else destroy it. There are pieces of paper that weigh more than stone, that slip through your fingers like nothing, but once read you feel like you've been pinned to the ground by something you'll never shake off. That receipt was one of them. The clerk at Silverbrook hadn't wanted to let me take it, said it was company policy, privacy concerns, all of it made sense technically. But when I told him it wasn't about the money, that the ring belonged to my late wife, his shoulders loosened. His voice lost that practiced sales tone and turned into something real, something human. He pulled out a thin folder from beneath the glass counter. Inside was a stack of paper receipts and digital printouts, nothing fancy, just invoices, numbers, names, ink and paper. But one page in that pile made my hands tremble. He slid it forward gently like he knew what it meant, like he could feel the electricity in my fingertips as I reached for it. There it was. Sale ID 1143-22, date 3 days ago. Item gold wedding band, vintage, engraved, E+H forever. Seller M. Bennett, signature, clear, smooth, practiced, not rushed, not shaky. Melissa hadn't hesitated. She hadn't looked over her shoulder or second-guessed the decision. She'd signed that page like she was paying for groceries. I stared at the page for what felt like hours, but must have only been seconds. The lines swam slightly as moisture crept into the corners of my eyes. I blinked hard to stop it. Not here, not now. The clerk didn't say anything. He just stood there, respectfully quiet, letting me take it in. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture. I didn't ask for a copy, didn't need one. That photo would live in my mind even without the digital proof. But now I had something real, something I could not only feel but show. Was she alone? Asked, he hesitated again, then nodded. Yes, came in by herself, said she was in a bit of a rush. A rush to sell my wife's wedding ring, the ring she wore through childbirth, through sickness, through nearly 5 decades of marriage. The ring she once twisted gently on her finger when she was nervous. The ring she reached for when she was thinking. The same ring I held in my palm the morning she died, sold in a rush. I thanked him again. My voice was flat, but he nodded anyway. He must have seen this kind of thing before, maybe not always as personal, maybe not always with this much weight behind it, but he knew better than to say something like, "I'm sorry," or "I hope it works out." There's nothing you can say when someone finds out the truth about someone they thought they could trust. I walked out of Silverbrook with my hands in my coat pockets, the cool spring air hitting my face like a slap I needed. At the corner, I stopped. There was a bench across from the florist shop Elaine used to love. She'd pick up dahlias every Saturday morning. I sat down and tried to catch my breath. I pulled out my phone again and stared at the photo. M. Bennett, Melissa, there it was, in her handwriting, in legal ink, in black and white. I felt hollow, not angry, not yet. That would come later. First came the ache. The kind that makes your chest feel both full and empty at once. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the ease of it, the cold efficiency with which she had done it. The fact that she hadn't flinched, hadn't warned me, hadn't confessed. She smiled through dinner 2 nights ago, knowing exactly what she'd done. I wondered if Jacob knew. God, I hope not. I stood up slowly, feeling my knees tighten, and made my way back to the truck. The entire ride home, the radio stayed off. The roads were quiet. Oregon pines lined the highway like silent witnesses at a stoplight. I found myself gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. That ring wasn't just gold. It wasn't just a keepsake. It was Elaine's last message to me, her last request: keep it so you'll never forget that you were loved. And now someone else had treated it like a pawn shop transaction, a convenience, a piece of metal to be liquidated before a wedding. It felt like someone had broken into my past, into my memories, and carved them up with a receipt. But that paper wasn't just pain, it was proof, and I wasn't going to let it sit quietly in my pocket, not anymore. I drove home slower than usual. I didn't want to arrive. I needed more time to think, to rehearse what I might say or what I might not say. The photo of the receipt burned in my pocket, but I didn't take it out again. I didn't need to. Every word of it was already imprinted on the inside of my mind. Melissa had signed it. Melissa had sold the ring. But had Jacob known? That question was a splinter under the skin, small but impossible to ignore. And with every mile back toward my house, I felt it press deeper. When I pulled into the driveway, Jacob's car was already there. He was inside, helping himself to leftover stew in the kitchen like he always did. I heard the microwave beep just as I stepped in. He turned and smiled. He looked like a boy again in that moment, tousled hair, hoodie, barefoot. My son. The kid who once cried because he thought we gave his dog away when we sent it to the vet. The boy who built forts in the living room and thought they'd protect us from anything. "Hey, Dad," he said, mouth full of food. "You just getting back from errands?" I nodded, hanging my coat. "Yeah, drove into town for a bit." I walked slowly into the kitchen and sat down at the table. He stood leaning against the counter, spooning food into his mouth like he hadn't eaten in a day. I studied him. He was calm, relaxed, not hiding something, at least. Not from what I could see, but I also knew better than to trust only what I saw. "I've been thinking," I said, keeping my voice light, almost like I was just making conversation. "What would you do if someone sold something that belonged to a loved one, something meaningful, not for survival, just for money?" He furrowed his brow and put the spoon down. "Like what?" "Like an old keepsake, a wedding ring, a war medal, something like that." He stared at me. "Who would do that?" I shrugged. "You know, people do strange things when money's tight." He shook his head, disgusted. "If someone did that, just sold something like that for cash, that's low. Honestly, that person shouldn't be trusted." There was a flash of real anger in his voice, unfiltered, raw. That's when I knew he didn't know. Jacob didn't know. I watched him as he grabbed a soda from the fridge, muttering something about how people these days don't respect memories. He didn't look at me again for a full minute, and during that time, my stomach twisted, because part of me had wanted him to be innocent. And part of me had been afraid that he wasn't, but he was, which left me with something worse than betrayal. Now I had to decide whether to tell him the truth, whether to lay bare what his fiancée had done behind his back, whether to risk the heartbreak, the embarrassment, the fallout. I sat quietly, nodding while he talked about the caterer giving them trouble over vegetarian options. I responded in all the right places, gave the right fatherly reactions. But my mind was elsewhere, because now I had a secret, one that didn't belong to me, and no matter what I chose, someone was going to get hurt. Later that night, after Jacob had left, I sat in the darkened living room with only the hallway light casting a faint glow across the carpet. I played the conversation back in my head, his tone, his face, his words. That person shouldn't be trusted. Melissa had taken more than the ring. She had taken Jacob's trust before he even knew it. I glanced over at the photo of Elaine on the mantel. Her smile caught the light just slightly, soft, reassuring, but it didn't make me feel any better. I wasn't angry yet, but I was getting close. And anger, when it comes late in life, is heavier than grief, because now I wasn't just mourning the loss of a ring. I was mourning the innocence of my son. The house was quiet after Jacob left, too quiet. I didn't turn on the television or the radio. I just sat in the kitchen, cup of cold coffee untouched in front of me, listening to the refrigerator hum and the wind graze the side of the house. It was the kind of silence that didn't settle, it pressed, like the walls were waiting for something to happen. Melissa texted around 8, said she'd left something here the other night, her sunglasses, maybe in the hallway. Asked if she could swing by to get them. I told her sure. She said she'd be there in 20 minutes. I stood by the window watching her car pull up. She walked up the steps like nothing had changed, still smiling, still perfectly composed. Still the woman who had signed her name on a receipt for my wife's ring and hadn't said a word to me about it. I didn't meet her at the door. I waited until she knocked. Then I opened it slowly. "Mr. Harold," she said, a little breathless like she jogged up the stairs. "I think I left my out back," I said, cutting her off. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Her smile twitched just for a second. She looked past me into the empty living room and then nodded. I led her through the house, down the hallway, past the cabinet she likely knew all too well by now. I opened the back door and stepped out onto the small wooden balcony that overlooked the garden Elaine used to tend. Hydrangeas were dry this time of year, leaves curled and browning, but they still held a shape, a memory of color. I leaned against the railing. Melissa followed, arms crossed, rubbing her sleeves like the air was colder than it really was. I didn't waste time. I pulled the phone from my pocket, opened the photo, held it out to her. She didn't move at first, then slowly she took it. Her eyes scanned the screen. She didn't gasp, didn't cry, didn't pretend not to recognize it. She just stood there, the silence stretched. "I needed the money," she said finally, voice low. "It wasn't about the ring. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone." Still, I said nothing. She looked up at me, face pale in the dim porch light. "It was a student loan, an old one. I've been trying to get ahead of it for years. Interest kept building. I didn't want to drag Jacob into it, not with the wedding coming. I was going to buy the ring back." "When?" I asked, voice even. "I don't know, after the honeymoon, maybe sooner." I nodded slowly, but it wasn't agreement. It was understanding of a kind, not sympathy. Just confirmation, the way you nod when someone finishes telling you something you already suspected. "You didn't think I'd notice," I said quietly. "You figured it was just a ring, old, forgotten." "I didn't think," she paused. "I hoped you wouldn't notice." And there it was, not just the theft, not just the lie, the calculation, the gamble. She hadn't been afraid of being caught. She'd bet I was too old, too distracted, too grief-worn to see what had happened right under my nose, but I had seen. And she was standing there now, not out of guilt, but because she'd been found out. I stepped back from the railing, turned toward the door. "I'll let Jacob know you stopped by," I said. She reached forward instinctively, like to stop me, then let her hand fall back to her side. "I'm sorry," she said, but it came out too polished, too practiced. I opened the door and walked inside, leaving her out there on the porch, not slamming the door, not raising my voice, just closing it quietly. Because sometimes silence is louder than anything else, and some betrayals don't deserve an argument. They deserve to be left standing alone in the cold. The house was still. Melissa's footsteps had faded down the porch stairs minutes ago, her car already gone, swallowed up by the empty road. But her presence lingered like the last echo of something that never truly belonged. I didn't move for a while, just stood in the hallway, the door behind me shut, my hand resting lightly against the wood-paneled wall. Then I turned toward the bedroom. There are places in a home that don't change, not because we never touch them, but because we touch them only with reverence. That second drawer in Elaine's dresser was one of them. It was her drawer, not for makeup or jewelry or clothes. It held pieces of her in paper form, old notes, cards, bookmarks, pressed flowers, a few folded recipes in her handwriting, and every letter Jacob had ever written from summer camp or college. She kept it in the same order, tied together with string or clipped with a paper clip, always neat, always purposeful. I hadn't opened it in over a year. I wasn't sure why, maybe because I was afraid of how much I'd feel if I did. Maybe because I'd told myself I already remembered everything she had to say. But that night, after Melissa had walked away with her silence and excuses, I needed to hear something real, so I opened the drawer. The familiar scent met me first, lavender, old paper, and time. I sifted carefully, like turning the pages of a life, and then I saw it. A single envelope, aged just enough to show it hadn't been placed there yesterday. My name wasn't on it. Jacob's was. It was her handwriting, soft and precise. The kind she used when writing something serious. A letter not meant for jokes or casual reminders. This wasn't a birthday card or grocery list. This was meant to be read only when it truly mattered. I sat down on the edge of the bed and opened it slowly. There were only a few lines, but they landed like a prayer spoken straight into the hollow space between heartbeats. Jacob, if one day you meet someone who loves you, I hope they also love where you came from. I hope they love your awkward teenage years, your tendency to overthink, your father's quiet strength, and my love for gardens and silence. Because if they don't love the pieces that made you, they don't love you entirely. Mom, I didn't finish the letter in one sitting. I had to put it down. Press my hands into my face and just sit there. I hadn't cried in years, not since the day we scattered her ashes in the lake where she once taught Jacob how to swim. But I cried then, quietly, because it was as if she had known, not about Melissa, not the specifics, but about this kind of moment, a moment when our son might forget that love isn't just built on present charm or future plans. It's built on memory, on history, on who we are before anyone ever falls for us. She had written this letter not to accuse or warn, but to remind. And now, sitting alone in our room, with that ring still lost and our son still in the dark, I felt both heartbreak and clarity. Jacob deserved to read this letter, but not yet. He needed to be ready, and I needed to decide what to do with the truth I held in my hands, the truth that his mother, even in her absence, had more wisdom than any of us could grasp while she was alive. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, not in the drawer this time, but in my coat pocket. Because some words weren't meant to stay hidden, they were meant to arrive at the right moment, like a lighthouse, like a warning before the tide pulled everything under. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I turned off the lights, pulled the blanket over me, listened to the wind knock softly against the window panes. But sleep stayed just out of reach, hovering like someone waiting outside a door they'd never open. So I got up before sunrise when the sky was still more shadow than light. I made a cup of coffee, left it untouched on the table, and stared at the letter in my coat pocket for a long time. By 6:15 a.m. I was already standing outside Jacob's apartment. The building was quiet, no traffic yet, no footsteps echoing in the stairwell, just the hum of early silence and the distant bark of a dog down the street. I knocked once, then again. After a moment, the door opened. Jacob stood there, shirt wrinkled, hair unkempt, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Dad," he said, confused, "is everything okay? Can we talk?" He stepped aside, still blinking off sleep, and gestured for me to come in. The living room was warm, a blanket on the couch, a book half open on the coffee table. It felt lived in. It felt like a space that expected peace. I didn't sit. He did slowly. I didn't start with small talk. I didn't ask about the wedding or the caterers or the music. I pulled out my phone, opened the photo, turned the screen toward him. He leaned in, squinted, read the name, the item, the date. He didn't speak. "I asked the clerk myself," I said. "He remembered her, said she insisted." Jacob looked at me. His face shifted through a storm of emotion, confusion, denial, anger, pain, and something else, something like betrayal, not of me, but of himself, of what he thought he knew. "She said she didn't want to worry you," I continued. "Said it was about a loan, said she planned to buy it back." Jacob's voice was quiet when it finally came. "You're sure it was her? She signed her name, Melissa Bennett, sold your mother's wedding ring 3 days ago." He looked down at his hands. They were clenched, motionless. I didn't press. I didn't dramatize. I didn't tell him what to do. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket and handed him the envelope. Elaine's handwriting stared back at him. He opened it slowly, read each line like it weighed something. When he finished, he just sat there, the letter resting in his lap. His eyes red but not crying. I sat beside him finally and let the silence breathe. "I'm not asking you to cancel the wedding," I said. He didn't look at me, just kept staring ahead. "I'm not going to tell you how to feel," I added. I'm not here to interfere, but I will say this. He turned toward me finally, his face tired, hollow, older than he'd looked just yesterday. Every decision we make, I said, tells the world who we are, and sometimes it tells us who the people closest to us really are too, not in theory, not in promises, but in practice, in pressure. He nodded slowly. It's your choice, Jacob, I said. But this is one you'll live with for a long time. His jaw tightened. I stood up, placing a hand briefly on his shoulder. Then I walked to the door. Before I left, I said just one more thing. Your mother saw the best in you, always, but even she knew love without respect is just dependency dressed up in pretty clothes. The sun was barely peeking over the hills when I stepped outside. The air was cold, but I felt lighter. I hadn't told him what to do. I had simply handed him the truth. And now, like any man becoming the version of himself he'll have to live with, he had to choose. The wedding had been set for Saturday. Invitations mailed, flowers ordered, suits tailored. It was the kind of plan that builds its own momentum, an engine that doesn't stop just because someone wants it to. It takes something bigger, a rupture, a choice, and it came, not with a dramatic announcement, not with shouting or confrontation. It came quietly. The next morning, just before 8 a.m., Jacob called. His voice was low, calm. Maybe even calm in a way that cost him something. It's off, he said. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. I didn't ask, are you okay? I asked instead. I don't know yet, he said, but I know it's the right thing. We didn't say much more. There wasn't much more to say. By noon, Melissa's belongings were gone from his apartment. By sundown, her name had been removed from the guest list. They weren't screaming at each other or making threats or airing anything online. They'd simply paused, put distance between themselves. Not a breakup, Jacob told me later, just some time, but we both knew what that kind of pause really meant. Sometimes love doesn't collapse with a bang, sometimes it just exhales and lets go. That same day I drove back into town. I went straight to Silverbrook. The clerk who'd helped me before recognized me instantly. You're back, he said carefully. I want to buy back the ring, I said, the one she sold. His face changed. I'm sorry, sir, like I said, it's already gone. Do you know where? He hesitated. I'm not supposed to share that. I understand, I said, but that ring wasn't hers to sell. It belonged to my wife. She died 5 years ago. That band was part of her, part of us. He looked down, biting the inside of his cheek. Then quietly he reached under the counter and pulled up a slip of paper. Man who bought it left a business card, he said. In case we found a matching band, he's a collector, sentimental type. The name on the card was someone I didn't know, but I called anyway. The man answered after 2 rings. When I explained who I was, there was a long pause on the other end. Then he said, I still have it, haven't even unwrapped it yet. I just like the engraving. I offered to buy it back. He didn't haggle. He didn't inflate the price. He simply said, come get it. 2 hours later. I was standing in his doorway. He handed me the ring in a small white envelope. I opened it on the drive home, slowly, as if it might vanish again if I blinked. There it was. Still warm from my grip, still simple, still engraved, E+H forever. I didn't cry, not this time. I brought it home, sat on the edge of the bed, opened Elaine's drawer. The velvet-lined box was still there, untouched. I lifted the lid and placed the ring back in its place, and for the first time in weeks, maybe longer, I felt something shift, not peace exactly, but something like it, a steadiness in my chest, a return to order. Elaine had always been the protector of this family, the calm voice in the middle of storms, the one who saw through charm, who sensed danger before it arrived, who believed in asking the right questions at the right time. And in that quiet moment, sitting there with the drawer open and the ring home again, I felt her presence, not like memory, but like momentum, like she'd been guiding me all along, like she still was. The wedding was supposed to mark a beginning. Instead, it became a pause, a mirror, a lesson, and though no one would speak of it openly, the truth had left its imprint. Somewhere in the silence, we had remembered who we were and who we were not. A month passed, the air in Oregon softened, spring loosened winter's grip. The garden Elaine once loved began to show signs of waking up, patches of green fighting their way through old soil, just like memories refusing to stay buried. And then one morning Jacob texted me, 3 words, you were right, no preface, no defense, no need, that was all he said. But sometimes 3 words carry more weight than a full confession. He didn't elaborate. And I didn't press him for details. I knew what he meant, and I knew what it cost him to say it. Melissa had moved out, quietly, no dramatic goodbyes, no angry words, just absence. One day her car was gone from the parking lot, the extra key was left on the counter. Jacob said she left a note thanking him for everything and nothing more. No apology, no acknowledgement of the ring, just the end of a story that had almost become permanent. He didn't ask for comfort, but I gave him space, gave him time. That's how men in our family have always handled pain. We don't run from it, but we don't parade it either. We live through it, then we build something from it. That's what I decided to do next. I took a portion of my pension and opened a small fund, nothing extravagant, nothing with a press release or a public campaign. I called it the Elaine Memory Scholarship. Each year, one young woman from our town would receive tuition support to study nursing or medicine. Fields Elaine once dreamed of pursuing herself back when she was a 17-year-old girl with ambition in her heart and too little money in her pockets. She never got to wear the white coat, but maybe, just maybe, someone else would. It wasn't about charity. It was about legacy, about placing something gentle into the world where something had once been taken. And I made one more choice. Every Saturday morning I walk back to Silverbrook. I don't go to browse, I don't go to shop. I go to the same counter where that ring once vanished and where it finally returned. The shop owner, he knows me by now. He keeps a space in the glass display for it. Elaine's wedding band. It rests in a small velvet cradle, gleaming softly under the light. I don't keep it hidden anymore. I let it live where it can be seen, not for sale, not for trade. Not for forgetting, just presence, a reminder. Beneath the glass, etched into a small brass plate, there are 6 words, with love not for sale. Visitors sometimes ask about it. The clerk never gives details. He just nods toward me when I'm there, polishing the glass with a cloth I bring from home. Some stories aren't meant to be retold in full. Some stories live in what we protect, in what we never let happen again. I lost a piece of Elaine when that ring disappeared, but I gained something else when it returned. I became the keeper, not of jewelry, of memory, of what we choose to carry and what we refuse to let be taken.